Are you? Awesome. Thanks, Anjali. Page. Thanks, Anjani. The host of the session, I'm just going to have a quick introduction, but the person who's going to drive this session is going to be Barkha. So the session today is going to be a brief tour of Purview, which is an Azure offering, and Barkha is going to walk us through that. As Anjali quickly mentioned, Anjali is the founder of the multi-cloud for you, as well as this community, the fifth IR. As Anjali mentioned, and dated me as somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, has had many roles, and really love to be part of this community and have more involvement. And Gavaskar, who's the delivery director for multi-cloud, is also on the call. And there are other team members who are supporting this particular event, and they are here to help you even on the chat as needed. Just as a quick introduction for me, you can see my LinkedIn information. I'll share this at the end. I've played many roles, being at Microsoft, usually initially part of the Microsoft support, and then part of the Microsoft IT organization. And at Citrix right now, I manage the data platforms, engineering, and security for the enterprise data and analytics organization. So going forward and talking about the rest of the event, this community is part of the fifth IR, or the fifth industrial revolution. The intention behind this is we as technologists, evangelists, and basically working on this sphere are limited in terms of how much we can spend time learning, and having dedicated learning sessions for days in and out is much more tougher. To basically have micro learning where we can learn from the experts in the field who have done this in the field and have real world experience is really great for us. So the intention, again, as the visual shows, is to expand across the universe or across the world. This community is spread across 80 countries, as for what I understand, and there's definitely a lot more presence. And the idea behind this is, as you learn more with the community, you get to have learner certificates that actually shows that you've learned and understood, and you've got real world understanding of how things are working. This is a community driven by volunteers and by engineers coming across from different parts of the world with different experiences and sharing their either gains or learning and knowledge. And the more we engage, the better we get at this part. Now, as part of this session, you will get a free certificate that showcases that you had a great learning from Barkha, and you've got a value to show for it. And Anjani and other team members will be helping you out to be able to get that certificate and align that to your profile if you need to. Without further ado, and I forgot to mention, definitely there is a chat capability available on the stream as well as here. So if you guys have any question, Gavaskar and other team members are in the chat trying to help and solve any challenges that you might have, or answer any questions that you have. So please feel free to make it interactive and ask questions. And this community has had a lot of members coming in from multiple skill levels and multiple generations, from Bob Ward to many other experts in the community, giving out sessions and explaining their learnings. So this community keeps growing, and the hope is to have some of you also come up and present more and engage more in the community. And finally, about Barkha, I have had the pleasure of listening to Barkha a few times, and she is an amazing speaker. And I really look forward to this talk from her. She is closely engaged with Microsoft and as a senior cloud solution architect. She also evangelizes on many of other projects, and she runs a community for women in technology that she will definitely talk more about. So, without further ado, Barkha, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Puneet. I appreciate. I hope I can live up to the hype. I'm going to try and share my screen with everyone. So today's topic is Azure Purview. I did this session a couple times for different communities. I wanted to keep it a little more serious this time around, but on other sessions when I talk about it, I title this session "All Your Data Are Belong to Us." I don't know if you can get the humor in that. It's actually from a game that was Japanese game that was badly translated. All your bases are belong to us. You can Google that after this session if you like. But you know, that's the purpose of Azure Purview. It's a unified data governance platform, and it is designed from the ground up to kind of unify all your data, right? So that's why the all your data. A little bit about myself. I do have a slide about myself. So I'm a senior cloud solution architect at Microsoft, 30 plus years. Yes, I look younger than I am. Worked and consulted for several companies such as IBM, Motorola, Office Depot, Deloitte, Raymond James, PwC. Started several businesses and exited out of them. So I've had some, entrepreneurship experience as well. And my passion is mentorship and coaching and learning. And as Puneet kindly talked about it, I am a big proponent for women in technology, other groups in technology. I volunteer. I run a women in technology group locally where I live. I volunteer to teach school kids in underprivileged areas within United States to learn computer science. And I'm, that's my passion. I think that when I grow up, that's what I want to do full time. So let's talk about data governance. So this is a new product, Azure Purview, and it's a top-down approach of how to do data governance. So let's talk about it. So there's 4 areas that it focuses. Purview as a product focuses on. The platform is cloud-based, so the governance in cloud. It sets the foundation for effective data governance, maximizes business value, and gain insight into data across the data estate. One thing I want to mention here, and you'll see further when I get to demos, that even though it's a cloud-based product, it's not limited to the cloud. It does do data governance for your on-premise data estate as well as other clouds. So it's not just Azure-based data. So we'll see that in a little bit. So here's a kind of an overview. So the 2 things that it does very well is it automates scanning and classification of multi-cloud SaaS on-prem data. So there's 25 out-of-the-box connectors and file formats that are supported right now, and they keep adding more as we go. On top of that, it's actually based on open APIs, based on Apache Atlas 2.0. So if you have written any connectors for Atlas 2.0, it'll work with Purview for the most part. I don't want to make a statement that it'll work guaranteed because there may be caveats, right? But for the most part, it'll work. Also, it has, so the bottom layer, you can see the Azure Purview platform. It's a map of the data. So yes, it is a data catalog. And it is serverless, pay-per-use, so it's economical. You don't have to have dedicated anything. And also includes scanning, processing, and classification. And we'll talk a little more about it. The layer above it gives you the capability of things like searching, browsing, looking at asset details, automated metadata and lineage extraction, automated classification based on content inspection, private endpoint, and a management center where you can do a couple of things. This is the Purview catalog, the C1 ring, and then the second ring, C0, allows you to define things like business glossary, lineage, and workflows, and a lot of insights. And again, we'll go into all of this in a little detail. So I'll walk through the Purview Studio real quick. So this is what it looks like. Before I go too far into it, let me go here. And this is actually what it looks like. So you'll see that this screen and this screen are very much alike. So I'm just, even though I'm using the slide deck, I want you to know that, we do have the environment, and I'll go into the demo in a little bit, a little more, but this is what it looks like. So this is a cloud-based view of the Purview Studio. As you can see, there's some icons on the left and some big blobs in the middle, and recently accessed stuff. So let's walk through this a little more. I've lost my slides. A second. All right. So on the left side is navigation. I'm not going to go through all this because some of it is very obvious, so I'll walk through this quickly so that we get to the more relevant parts of it. So there's updates, you can switch accounts, there's notifications and feedback. The homepage has, what corporation it belongs to, that's the title. It has some statistics, overview on how many users, how many sources. So sources are individually registered. I'll give you an example of sources. If you have a huge data SQL Server installation on-prem, that is one source. If you have a data lake deployed somewhere on the cloud, and it doesn't matter which flavor, that is a source. If you have a Oracle deployment somewhere, that is a source. If you have a server in Azure, that's a source. So those are all examples of sources. The terms actually talks about.
Hi, Barkha, excuse me. Can you please remove two white color bar at the both side of the page, because it is making the whole screen is little bit smaller size. Two white color bar at the both side of the page, so it is showing the page is little bit smaller. It's very difficult to visualize.
Okay, so I don't know how to do that. I'm not used to.
Yeah, I have done full screen. I am zooming, but the screen is not coming fully. Anyway. Yeah, I have done that, but if you can increase the screen size by Control Plus, that would be helpful. Yeah, that works.
So that's it, and I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit, but I mean, you don't have to memorize this. You can actually get a Azure free account and log in, and you can take a look at some of this stuff. But yeah, I'll be mindful of zooming. But this is just some statistics, and then here's the main navigation where you can do things like register sources, browse assets that are already been categorized, scanned and categorized, and then also manage glossary. Here's some links, just documentation and helpful links, and this is recently accessed stuff. Okay. I want to spend a tiny bit of time on this section because one of the things that Azure Purview does is it has built-in security roles that allow you to provide security. And I'm going to increase the size so you can see. But basically, you can have different roles. You have different roles. And out of the box, you can assign roles to people so that, for example, the person who registers a source is not the same person who wants to do research on the source or even has, glossary information. And the person who creates the glossary is not necessarily the person who registers the sources and things like that. So there is a role. And again, I'm going to give you links to all of this. This is well documented, so don't worry about, and there's recordings of this, right? So don't worry about writing it down at this point. So let's talk about the platform and sources. So and don't worry about the image here. If you can read the screen, let me know. Are you able to read the slide? Okay. So one of the big part of Purview is, of course, because it is a data catalog, right? It's a map of all your data. You should be able to register all your sources. And part of how we do that is we allow you to register sources and group them. And in this picture, and I'm going to try and zoom into this a little bit. In this picture, you can kind of see that there's these boxes that say North America Data Center, Europe Data Center, Azure and BI North America. So the idea here is that you can actually create your source within a map such that it makes sense to you, right? So it could be however, like these assets that you see underneath it, the on-prem server, Teradata, Hive Metastore, Financial SQL, SAP HANA, they're all very different types of sources, but they all belong in one data center or, so you have different groupings. So that's one way that it helps. Let's take a look at how the source is created. So I'm going to show you first on the slide deck, and then we'll walk through the actual registration part. So you can see that you can register many types of data sources. And again, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see a little better. So you have Amazon S3, Azure, Cosmos DB, data lakes. And as I said, 25 out of the box flavors and more being added as we speak. So this is how you would register a source. And the way it does is that it actually will hang on a second. Let me share my screen and let me know if you can see this, and let me know if you need to increase the size of this as well. So let me see. Let me know if you can see this. So this is my test area, and you can see that I've created 2 sources. I can register a new source just by saying this, clicking on the register, and you can see all the sources. And I can go through the UI to register that. Okay, so it'll say Azure Blob Storage. It'll ask me some questions about subscription, name, endpoint, and the collection is the grouping that I showed you earlier on the screen. So this is how you would actually, so let's say that I'm going to use this, and there you go. We have a new registration, okay? So the next step after you register is you set up a scan. And the idea here is that we want to scan the data, scan the asset for several things. One, we want to understand what's in it, right? So we want to understand the metadata for it. We want to understand what type of files, what type of structures, what kind of stuff. The second part of that is to understand what kind of data it stores. So if I actually move on, it'll show you. So this is an example of a scan for a data lake storage. And you can see that it's showing the data lake, and then underneath it, there's the option to scan just all or some data, right? So there's a couple of folders, analytics, production data, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever that is. And then you can also pick which file type you want to scan. And then the next set is the classification rules. So this is a significant thing. What you can do in Purview is when you scan the data, you want to learn something about the nature of the data. And what you want to learn is, hey, is this restricted data? Is this violating some code or some policy requirement? And the rules that you can use to do the classification, you can define here. And we'll go a little bit deeper into this, so don't worry about it too much. But here's an example. We're saying that, hey, apply all government rules, apply all financial rules, apply all personal rules, security rules, and miscellaneous rules. And then also there's some custom rules. So we've defined things like transaction ID in our system is 10 digits, numeric. Supplier number is 6 digits, that's alphanumeric or whatever, if you define a pattern. And we'll go into that a little bit. And then finally, you can say that you can either scan it once or you can set up a recurring scan. So there's a scheduler. You can say, hey, you can do it every day, every month, whatever it looks like. Okay, so any questions about how to register sources? And I'm gonna dedicate a little bit of time towards the end too, when you see the whole picture. So let's move on. The next is the ability to browse and search. Now, my screen that I shared with you, I showed you that I have 3 registered sources and a little bit of data. That's great, but in real life, you know that there's hundreds and hundreds of sources, and looking at it one at a time is cumbersome. So there's a very good browse and search built into it. So you can actually go to browse and search, and you can enter what you're searching for. And within the search result, and let me zoom in a little more so you can see the screen. So you can kind of see, hey, here's the result. We did a search for revenue, and here's what came up. So it's showing on the right side, you can see, there's an SAP source that has revenue. There's a revenue collection. Customer rewards has revenue in the path in Teradata table. Web marketing is a S3, just a file folder that has revenue built into it. And then within that, you can also filter, and the filter is using, are you looking for Glossary related, finance related revenue, or rewards revenue, or whatever. So here's how you would say, hey, I'm looking for worldwide sales related revenue. And it'll narrow your search down. Here's an asset overview. So this is an example of revenue by customer that was based on the search. And this is what you can see. I'm going to zoom in so you can see a little better. So you can see that there's overview, schema, lineage, and contacts. What I'm going to do is see if we can use my screen to do this. So this is my screen. And if I go to this, actually, if I go to browse assets, let's take a look at this guy. This is just an Azure database that I registered. And this is the sample source. So here's a source, right? So this is the screen, and let me know if you can see this clearly. I have it at higher resolution. So this is the overview, and you can see here that there's a schema classification that we found in the address, which is world cities. The properties are, there's not much interesting to see here. But in the schema, you can kind of see that, you know, there's a column name, there's a classification, there's also sensitivity labels, and I'll go over that a little bit, and glossary terms, we'll go over that a little bit too. There's no glossary terms related to any of these, but we do see that there's a world city and the data type. And also the next thing we want to talk about is this lineage. So the lineage actually, and I'm going to have to reduce this so you can see. The lineage, actually I can increase this. So if you look at the lineage, you'll see that there is this is a SQL table, and there is a Azure Data Factory copy activity that actually does something with this table, and then it ends up in a data lake storage as a CSV. So this is kind of like a useful way to look at your entire data estate. Yes, you're looking at the address table within an Azure SQL database. However, this is also showing where else does it end up. So if there were any other processes, they would show up here. In most real life scenarios, you know as well as I do, working in data for a long time, that there's going to be like tens of processes that happen to this. So this is one way to look at that. Okay. So moving on. So here's a schema. Now, in this case, they do have glossary terms defined. So you can see that the schema shows that, hey, there's a classification called customer ID, which is a custom classification. The little lightning bolt next to it shows it's a built-in as opposed to custom. And the glossary term says that, hey, we've defined this glossary term called customer, and this happens to be a customer related thing. And then we talk about lineage. Now, this is a better example of lineage. Again, let me zoom in so you can see a little bit, but you can kind of see that, hey, here's a lineage. And the way it works is that we're looking at campaign analytics, but it has multiple sources. So it comes from campaign revenue, which is a rev by customer, and digital campaign, which are in turn gotten by a Synapse, rev by customer, which is before it ends up in Synapse, it's actually coming from customers, retail location, and sales invoices in this case, and weblogs and coupon store in this case. The other thing that I didn't show you on my screen was contact. So if you have a question about a table, what do? Using Purview, you can actually look at the contacts tab and say, hey, you know, Dorothy is responsible for the platform this table, maintaining this table. So there's a expert versus owner. Expert's role could be a business person, right? Or an architect that could tell you, hey, how do we use this in our business? As opposed to owner, that could be, you know, a PM or a developer, who knows, based on your system. And then also there's a related tab that kind of gives you some relationships, if there are any. And this is just a list of the relationships. Any questions on assets? Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm gonna move on. Let's talk about business glossary a little bit. So you can see that you can define business glossary, and unlike the first version of the data catalog, in this product we can have multiple glossaries. And the reason for that is that when we talk about let's say an account, right? An account is maybe in IT, that means something specific. In dev, it means something specific, but in accounting, an account is completely different. They could be talking about bank account or a financial institution account, right? So there's a need for having glossary defined in different ways. So the way Purview does it is that it actually allows you to create new terms. And also, not only does it allow you to create new terms, it also allows you to create templates to define the term. So what does that mean? Again, I'm going to go to my screen here. And then if I go home and manage glossary, you can see that I have some stuff defined. This is very silly stuff. I have an address and an address to defined. And when I look at an address, it just has a formal name, some definition, acronym, assets. It has related, as well as it has some children. So an address can have an address to and city. And it also has some contacts. So contacts are just me because it's my example. But let's do a new, and you'll see how this works. You can actually say, hey, I can choose a system default template. I can choose a generic template or a marketing template, or I can create a new template. So the new template just lets you, and I'm going to call it test, lets you add a new attribute. And the idea here is that you can define new fields within the glossary term, and you can talk about it. So is this required or not? Is this auditable? Is this required by audit? Is this a financial something? I don't know what the terms is, what the requirements are, but it allows for it. So I'm going to cancel out of this. But if you look at the generic one, I've added a new attribute name called tag, right? So tagging is important. A lot of people use tagging for all kinds of stuff. Or I could use the marketing one. So marketing, if I look at view details, I've defined a new attribute name, for lack of imagination, called marketing attribute. So that's an example. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slide deck. And so here it is. Here's how you would go about. And again, let me zoom in. And basically, it's easy. You define a new term, market development and sales. You do some description. You can add some acronyms, and you can add some resources. So what do the resources look like? Hang on a second. I went too far. Yeah. Yeah. And this is all you. Now, also, it sounds very tedious because most of you work with lots of data. There is a way to import glossaries, so don't worry about it. I'm just kind of giving you the overview of what can be defined in a glossary term. So if you have an Excel spreadsheet with a ton of glossaries, you can import it, or a CSV file. So here's the bulk import process for existing dictionaries. And you can create new templates. We talked about this a little bit. Let's talk about Purview Insights. I don't have a demo or my own data for this because the data insights depend on a lot of data, and I don't have a lot of data on my example. So let's just walk through this. So here's an example of data insights. This is a screenshot that kind of tells you, hey, what type of assets do I have? So if you look at this picture, the leftmost, the biggest box blue, is an ADLS Gen 2. The second one is a Azure Synapse Analytics data. The teal green one is SQL Server. There's some Azure SQL databases, Cosmos DB, all that kind of stuff. There's also this this graph on the bottom. I don't know if I can. So here's the graph on the bottom that you can look at, and it kind of says that, hey, you know, in the last 30 days, what kind of classification happened with what source? And, you know, here's an example of what kind of classification for files specifically. And one of the biggest pain points I experience with my customers is, you know, they have all this data in files, right? PDF files or Excel files or whatever type of files. It could be, you know, Parquet or whatever. And they want to know what kind of data exists in it. And this gives you a snapshot of what type of data is available. Too far. All right, so this is how you would navigate to it. You go to the home and then you click on the assets. From that light bulb, the insights, you go to assets and it'll tell you, hey, you have you know, this many data sources, this many discovered assets, and this many classified assets. And then here's a snapshot of scans. So it seems like they do scans periodically, and this will give you, you know, how many scans ran, failed, succeeded, that kind of stuff. So this is just a quick snapshot. Here's a glossary oversight. So you can see that in this case, going too far, customer is the most common glossary term that was found. And, you know, total terms defined were 312 and approved 289. I forgot to mention this, that the glossary term, when you define it, it's usually created as a draft. And you can ask other, you know, like there could be a workflow that says, hey, send this to review by somebody who can make it live. So you don't have to worry about half defined terms. You can have draft glossary terms. And here's a snapshot of classification, 22 subscriptions, unique classifications found, classified sources, files, all this stuff. So I want to talk a tiny bit about sensitivity labels. Now, this is a unified platform, and the way this works is that you can identify sensitivity labels in your data. However, Purview is not where they are defined. So if you're familiar with Azure, Azure M365 has a place to define policy. And the policies defined in M365 apply to the entire corporation. So in other words, the policies cover things like emails that you can send, right? Screenshots of anything, Teams communication, whether it be in database or data lake or in Office 365, SharePoint, any place you define a policy, the same policies apply. And Azure Purview imports those policies and does the sensitivity label based on that. So that's where you define it. But here you can take a look at all your registered data sources and how the sensitivity labels were defined. So this is just an example. Let's say we defined a secret label or a Contoso FTE label or a demo label or all employees or general. So these are just showing up here. And also, finally, the file extension. So this just gives you, hey, what type of files are classified, most of the time. So docs, XSL, text, whatever. If there were other file types, they would show up here as well. Okay, any questions on that? How programmatically register asset and glossary terms? How many different API supports for managing this Azure Purview objects? So great questions. Thank you for asking. Programmatically, everything that you see. So here's the trick, guys. I work for Microsoft. Customers come to me and they ask me about something, and they say, "How do I do this?" If I can't figure it out in 10 minutes, I actually look at I go to the portal, I turn the developer tools and see what calls were made. Everything that you see, because it's a website, there's an API in the backend that's doing it. Everything that you could see in the UI is programmatically capable, right? So programmatically registering assets and glossary terms. Here, the glossary term can be imported, and I showed you that. So if you saw that, but there's an import terms. I don't know if you can do it programmatically. I'm sure there is a CSV file import. And the way I would do it is I would look at the developer tool to see what API, but you can bulk import terms, right? So that's on the glossary terms. As far as discovering new sources, what we've seen in a lot of cases is that, let's say that you have an on-prem data estate, you have a DMZ that's set up, and behind the DMZ you have n number of servers. You can script discovery of data estates, and you can script new databases added to a server and then auto register it. So all that is scriptable. You could use a PowerShell for it, you can use CLI for it, and any of those things. Anything that you see in UI is scriptable, and when I share the docs with you, you'll see that it's documented. You don't have to do the technical work that I'm telling you. The second part of that is also, as far as the files, if you have the root register, you can definitely register it. And the third is it's completely based on Atlas API. And sorry, thank you, Puneet, for sharing that link. So anything you can do in Atlas, you can do with Purview. So you can use scripting to discover terms. As a matter of fact, it's done a lot. A lot of our customers do that because it becomes tedious after a while to do this manually. I'm showing you the manual stuff just for capabilities. 90% of the time when we are working in Azure, we're not using the UI, we're doing it all programmatically. So good question, thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about the Management Center. So this is the final tab here. So we went over the how to register and browse assets, how to create terms, glossary terms, look at insights, and the final is the management. So each Azure account has a friendly name. Okay. And then also this is the, again, this is available in the docs. I just wanted to emphasize that there's built-in RBAC, role-based security. So not everyone has access to the management center. We already talked about this. Integrated runtime. Let me talk about that real quick. So this is how you would actually work with on-prem data estate or even a third-party hosted data estate, right? So this is where you would deploy an integrated runtime, self-hosted integrated runtime that will allow you to connect with your on-prem as well as third-party hosted data estates, data centers. Let's talk about classification rules. So we talked a little bit about classification. You can create classifications of your own. Let's go here. Let's go to Azure Purview. Actually, let's go here and look at classification rules. So let's first go here. And you'll see that we give you a ton of these classification rules out of the box. So we have ABA routing number, age, Australia related, Austria related, Belgium related stuff, all kinds of stuff. There's EU stuff, all kinds of stuff out of the box, right? So these are all rules that are commonly used in organizations that we learned about. And so we actually give you all those. You can also define custom rules, right? You can define custom classification and custom classification rules. So I have, for instance, defined these three, lack of imagination, BH test, BH. So those are my names. But the way these work is, and let's create a new one. Why not? Very imaginative name of BH4. And so this is a rule. This is a classification. However, when we define a rule, so let's create a new rule, and we're going to call it a BH4. You can actually say that, hey, this is related to BH4. This is the rule that applies to this classification. And then you can say things like, and you can change state. You can have enabled or disabled. You can do things like use a regular expression or dictionary. So regex, we all know how regex works. This is what you would use if you are defining a data scan. So you're scanning the data to understand whether this is a social security number or something like that, or a bank account number or something like that. So dictionary is where you would define if you were doing things like name of countries, right? There's a finite name of countries. It's actually a list. There's no rhyme or reason why a country is called what it's called, but we're going to import them. If you have within your organization something that is like that, you have 100 job titles and you want to classify job titles, that's how you would define it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. What you can do is you can define the pattern for the data. So this would be a rule for defining the data, and then, or you can define the column. So I'll give you an example. One of the classification is age. Well, what data pattern does that follow? It's just a number. So how do you distinguish between age and count, let's say? So in that case, you may want to define a rule for looking for the word age in the column name, right, somewhere. And then I want to talk a little bit about this minimum match threshold. What does this mean? So this means that how much data would be scanned for classification of this field. So in other words, if you have 100 records and you want to see if it's a age or not, because ages can only be between, they can be positive and they shouldn't be, let's say 150, right? They shouldn't be over 150. So we could say that scan 100% of the data. But if you have a file that's a terabyte, do you really want to scan 100% of the data to determine its age or not? So this is where you can kind of set your rules saying, hey, let's just do 5% of the data and see what we come up with. Because chances are if the first 5% has a numeric date, then it's likely a date. So this affects how scanning works. So it's important to understand this when you're setting up rules, okay? I'm not gonna go ahead and save this. I'm gonna cancel this, but you get the picture. Okay, so that's that. Okay. Okay, so now we are at the question part of our session. So first of all, I want to ask you all a question, and feel free to let me know in chat. Does this seem like it's a usable product for your estate, data estate? Is this something you can do? Yes, no, maybe? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so I'm assuming. So Anthony says yes. Thank you, Anthony. I'll give you an example, for instance, right? One of my clients, awesome, Dheeraj. One of my clients had, they inherited, and somebody left. They inherited like 1,000 reports, and they just kind of needed to know what the reports were about, right? And sometimes the names of reports don't tell you what they're about. So they imported all the reports, and they were able to import all their data sources and use the lineage, just the lineage part of this tool, to understand what each of the reports were, and immediately they were able to contact that. Now, I know that the lineage, it looks pretty on the screen, but in reality, that data is data, and you can put it in an Excel spreadsheet or a database or whatever, and you can analyze it. You can actually analyze it. You can find out what's used, what's not, what's overused, things like that. Okay. Nice having you here, Dheeraj. So that's a very good example of sort of using Purview, and within like a week, having amazing results of having a better idea of what your data is. Another company that collected a lot of data on Data Lake, initially on their file system, and then they moved it to Data Lake, had no idea, like there was archival data, and they didn't know how to archive it because it could have sensitive data. So they would have to do a different policy to categorize it. So they used Purview to determine sensitivity data within, their 10-year-old files that were collected, right? So so they were able to create new policies and decide how to archive data based on that. So things like that. So it's a very powerful tool. It's still in preview. It has a lot of connectors right now, but more coming all the time. And, so those are real world examples. So any other questions, guys? Here's the doc link, docs.microsoft in Purview. It's a great place to start. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 So the data quality rules, no, it does not do data quality rules. And right now, this is less, it's more about lineage and classification and less about data quality. So it's not currently part of Purview. So that's a good question, though. As far as monitoring, again, this is a passive tool. It's not an active, in other words, it's not this is a planning tool, not a monitoring. So I'm not sure what that means. As far as monitoring is in having periodic scans to make sure that the data does not have anything that is sensitive or classified a certain way, then yes. But if you're talking about production monitoring of data sources, then no, it's not.
So Barkha, this is Anupam here. What I meant by monitoring is the monitoring of the data quality rules.
Right.
So, which you already answered that it's not.
Got it. Thank you, Anupam. Yeah, no, it does not do data quality monitoring. Now, is there a way where you can include classification rules that that flag something, because it does pattern matching, right? Yes, but it's not designed as a data quality tool, so that's not what it's doing. Gaskar asks, what exactly is meant by classified assets? So classified assets is, let's say that you have a example, a SQL Server or any flavor or a data lake of file with thousands of files in it. This tool, and we talked a little bit about it when we were talking about classification, it'll actually read the contents of it and apply the patterns that were defined in the rule. So it could be a regex pattern. And if it finds it consistently, then it'll flag it as that type of data. So a great example is one of the rules that we have for personal data is emails. We shouldn't be giving out people's emails. We shouldn't put emails in a public facing place, right? And it's not encrypted or something like that. So there's actually laws about it in certain countries and states. So you can actually run a scan that flags anything that shows up as email based on the data, and it'll classify it as a data as an email. So that gives you some insight. Hey, wait a minute, this folder has a ton of emails in it, right? So that's an example. Does this support Azure Log Analytics for data source? Yes, it does. So if I see if I can see, so if I go here and register sources, and if I do new, I believe ADX here, Custo. So this is, Log Analytics workspace. Log Analytics workspace is generally either saved in a storage, so you could use the storage as a space, right? If you're using Custo to do something, you can use that, or you could. I don't think it does. If you put it in any other type of space, I don't know. And it has. I have someone who's actually an example who's used a Atlas connector for a event grid and used it successfully. So you could use that as well. I don't know if that answers your question. Hopefully it does. Okay, well, I'm gonna stay here for a couple more minutes, but I wanted to share my LinkedIn. So it's Barkha Herman. Search for me, you'll find. I think I'm gonna make a bold statement here that I'm the only Barkha Herman in the world because I have a very Indian first name and a very German last name, and I don't know many people who have that. So and I also have a website and I have Instagram. happy to help anyone with Purview related question, other data related questions. And I talked a little bit about my passion, which is mentoring and coaching and women in technology, helping kids and people. So anything related to that, I'm happy to talk to you all about. And with that, I'm going to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today and talk to you all.
I am. Yeah. Hey, Anjali. So, yes. All right. As part of this session, if I can get this to work. As part of this session, you would be getting a sample certificate. And here is the speaker code that you can use to. Please go ahead. Just putting that in the chat, sorry. Yes. No, I think Barkha inspired us. We've implemented Purview at our company, and we've leveraged most of the aspects that Barkha shared. This has been an interesting experience, especially the whole Atlas API integration with Purview and the ability to really define classifications has been very helpful for us. So it's great to hear Barkha again on this.
Everyone.
Everyone.